probably not going to be able to touch on everything I want to touch upon. I wanted to kind of start out with the Epistle of Barnabas first, because that sort of leans a little bit on Daniel's vision here, his dreams. So just starting out with chapter 4, he ends chapter 3 on the note where he says that he foresaw that the people who he had prepared in his beloved should believe in guilelessness, and made all things plain to us beforehand, that they should not be shipwrecked by conversion to their law. And so, in other words, there are basically two laws, according to Barnabas, and that there's sort of the Jews, if you will, have one law, and which is kind of literalistic, and the Christians have what he considers to be a higher law, which is more spiritual. Okay, and so this is sort of the stakes here. Are we going to fall under literalism, or are we going to ascend, if you will, into spiritual understanding? And so that's kind of what we've culminated. He talks about how there's sort of like two ways, and he gets a little more into that as we go on, but he sort of paints it to where there's like this higher law, which the man of light, or the spiritual man, or the understanding man will understand, and they'll read between the lines. And he applies it, as you'll see as we get into dietary laws, he applies it to why do we require sacrifice over here, right? When what he's really talking about is, forgiveness and, tearing up your, like over here it's like fasting, dietary laws, that kind of thing. Like the laws are sort of spelled out, but Paul and various other New Testament writers give us insights as to the fact that the law was added later because of transgressions. So they're sort of pointing to earlier laws. Jesus says the same thing. Why does Moses allow us to divorce our wives? And he says, well, it wasn't so at the first. So the spiritual laws are kind of first, right? Whereas the literalistic, like the laws of Moses or whatever, are secondary, right? And that these apply to, the obedient children, the children of light, the spiritual people, etc. Whereas these laws are directed to keep these people in line and to sort of be a misdirect, in all honesty. And so there's a kind of an ambiguity, if you will. That you read it one way and it traps you in a world of literalism and in sacrifices and in fastings and into dietary restrictions and that kind of thing. Again, this is from Barnabas' perspective. This is how he looks at it, right? So he says, like later on when you get in past chapter 15 and 16 where it talks about, the two ways and stuff like that, where he quotes the Didache, then you can kind of see where he's getting at. But he says, now we ought then to inquire earnestly into these things which are now. And this is another template that Barnabas gives you. That what is, what was, and what is to come. And you'll notice that a lot of what I talk about is predicated on these three divisions. What is, what was, and what is to come. We've talked about this before, this being a time, so to speak, of 2,000 years, right? And this being what is the time, so it's time, and then what was is the times, which is 4,000 years, right? Because that's 2 times that, right? And then half a time. And you find this also in Daniel too, which I don't think we'll have time to get into. We may have to push that into next week, but whatever. But you see that he talks about that too, the way that the age is divided is into a time, times, and half time. So what is, what was, and what is to come. So then when he says, we ought then to inquire earnestly into the things which now are, right, which is this, the time, right, the 2,000 years, in other words, right, is what he's talking about now are. To seek out those things which are able to save us, right, in that present time, which is starting from about the year 4000 or whatever, around that time frame. It says, let us then utterly flee from all the works of lawlessness, lest the works of lawlessness overcome us. And it's sort of an irony here that he speaks of the law in itself as being a misdirect. So in his view, lawlessness is literally falling under the law. That's his assertion anyway. That lest the works of lawlessness overcome us, and let us hate the error of this present time, which again is what is the 2,000 years, right? And that we may be loved in that which is to come, right? Which is this, right? Which is the 1,000 years, right? The millennium that is spoken of through the scripture. So you see it happening on the timeline, the way he's laying it out. And then he says, let us give no freedom to our souls to have power to walk with sinners and wicked men. In his mind, those are the people, the Judaizers, right? Lest we be made like unto them. In other words, if we fall victim to their legalism. The final stumbling block, right, is at hand, right? Remember it talks about the time is at hand. So he's talking about the 2,000 years, right? The final stumbling block is at hand, which is written, as Enoch says. So he's quoting Enoch by name, right? So right there, just stop and think about all that we've ever talked about, all that I've ever brought to you is this notion that Enoch was important to the people of the early church, and that his credibility, the credibility in the book of Enoch, is representative of early Christian teaching, early Christian doctrine. So he's bringing up Enoch in terms of their present beliefs, right? So it says the final stumbling block is at hand, which was written, right, as Enoch says, for to this end the Lord has cut short the times and the days. So times is kind of equal to days. Because this would be sort of a day with that particular template, right? And this would be like 2 days if you sort of interpreted those as meaning, and this would be like half a day, right? And so that comes into play when you see the term 3.5 days. So there's a little bit of conversion going on here. So this is just to kind of prepare you for what you're reading in Daniel, right? Is to understand how Barnabas saw it, because this is the breaking down of the times according to his template. For the Lord has cut short the times and the days, that his beloved should make haste and come into his inheritance. So in other words, we had the power during this time to inherit, right? But what did we do? We negated what the prophets taught. They taught, for example, out of the book of Enoch, right? And so this created a problem, because now you had 2,000 years at stake, plus potentially 1,000 years at stake for being lost, right? Because if you subverted, if you missed out on this central teaching, and if you missed out on this dividing of the times, and you missed out on what he was saying, right, then this and potentially that could be in jeopardy, right? So what does he mean by this? And it says, well, again, for to this end the Lord has cut short the times and the days, that his beloved should make haste and come into his inheritance. So that was meant to happen theoretically at this time. And Peter seconds this too, because in 2 Peter he mentions something to the effect of that you would never fall. If you added, virtue to your faith and then added knowledge to virtue and all of that, he goes through this formula here, and then he adds to that to brotherly kindness and to kindness, whatever. He talks about this, and he says, if you do these things, you will never fall, right? But he also understands inevitably that we will fall. So he talks about a remembrance and a return. Those two, and it's written to those who will achieve in the future, right, a like faith as they had at the beginning, right? So those who have, it is written to those at the end of the 2,000 years, in other words, who have achieved a like faith as what we have. That's Peter's angle on this, right? And then he says, and this is where I kind of, it's kind of hard to teach out of Barnabas, because Barnabas kind of plays a little fast and loose with sources sometimes. And so it's kind of hard to, it works against his credibility, unfortunately. As much as I like Barnabas, and as much as Barnabas has changed the way I look at things, from an academic's point of view, it works against his credibility. He says that the prophet also states thus, that 10 kingdoms shall reign upon the earth, and there shall rise up after them a little king who shall subdue 3 of the kings under one, which is more a reference to Daniel than to Enoch. But anyway, the subtext is that Enoch
what verse
is a prophet.
Right. So the 10 kings will reign on the earth, and after the little king will arise and will subdue the 3 kings of the earth with a single blow. This also reminds us of, doesn't the beast from the book of Revelation, he's got 7 heads, but he has 10 horns, which represents 10 kingdoms.
Let's break down the timing here, because this is the way I see it. Okay, so this is my own thought.
Right.
Is that okay?
But what is this? What is the exact citation of the scripture? Daniel 7:24. Is that the verse? Where's my Bible?
Well, I have it here. It says, "And the 10 horns out of his kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings." Right. Now, here's the way that I break it down myself. All right, and again, this is just my way of seeing. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so all right, so at this point there is the cross, right? Remember what is said to Jesus at the sea by Gadara, Gergesa, or whatever. Have you come to destroy us before the time? Now here we have, well, this is essentially the dividing of the times. This is the secular age right here, right?
That's the secular age, you mean like...
and then, well,
what do you mean by secular age?
Well, I mean in terms of 6 days are given over to man, right?
Are you talking about the history of mankind?
Basically, it's the 6,000 years that are given over to mankind are entailed in this particular pattern.
So you're talking about from the expulsion of the Garden of Eden until today.
From the fall of man, right? 6 days, and Barnabas is explicit about that too. He talks about the 6 days or 6,000 years. So I'm using Barnabas's logic here, right? What I'm saying is that separate from that, you have the Christian era, right? Which we know is broken down into 2,000 years and then the millennium, right? So here you have 1 and 2 and 3, which are parenthetically 8, 9, and 10, if you're counting them both as, because this has to do with the Christian age. Okay, so if you take that, then 7 plus 3 equals 10, right? So you get that idea that that these 3 are one kind of thing, and that these 6 are one kind of period, right? And that this 7th period, which is in Christianity the 3rd period. See, this is why you get like 3rd day, right? Because it's referring to the Christian thing. And then this is where you get 7th day, which is the Sabbath. But in this rendering, they're really just the same day. It's just 3 days of the Christian era, or 7 days if you go all the way back to creation, right? So it just depends on which template you're using. So then he says, and then the prophets said also, 10 kingdoms shall reign upon the earth, which again, this is the Earth's timeline, right? So that's how you get 10, right? Is because those are the 10 kings, so to speak, the 10 kingdoms. And there shall rise up after them a little king, who shall subdue the 3 kings under one. So, what does this mean? Okay, so this is where it gets a little confusing, because does he mean that after this, like, does the king come here, right? Is it here where this guy comes because it's after the 10, right? Or does it mean that after this is established, or after this is shown, or after this is known?
Who's this king you're talking about?
Well, it's the little horn, right?
What is the little horn?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to. It says, and the prophet also says, Barnabas apparently meaning Enoch, but actually quoting Daniel, right? That's what I was trying to get at. It's hard to give a whole lot of. He's actually quoting Daniel, but he seems to think that it's Enoch, right?
In this, this version, this is the Apostolic Fathers. What do they put? I just had it open to it. Yeah, First and Second Clement. There's a footnote on that section.
Well, anyway, I wanted to at least get through to verse 6 here, because that's kind of where the thought kind of closes here. Okay. It says, and he goes on. So let's read it. And the prophet also says thus: 10 kingdoms shall reign upon the earth, right? So that's the 10 ages broken down into 7 and 3, right? That shall reign over the earth, and there shall rise up after them a little king who shall subdue 3 kings under one, right? So people identify this as the Antichrist, right? And Daniel says likewise. So now he knows he's talking about Daniel. It says, Daniel says likewise concerning the same, that I beheld the 4th beast, wicked and powerful and fiercer than all the beasts of the sea. Which people at the 4th beast, I mean, if you go by what the scholars are saying, and it kind of plays out that this is the Roman Empire.
This is chapter 7 of the book of Daniel. You have the 4 creatures. I guess you got to know.
The discrepancy between Barnabas and Daniel when he means Enoch or Daniel be like a scribe error.
Maybe this is the Apostolic Fathers.
Well,
it says here. It says that's 4:3 as Enoch says. It says one ancient authority reads as Daniel says. It's not clear what text the author may have had in mind.
Yeah,
so
it could have been a scribal mistake, right? It can be that too, but it could be like if he's saying that, and the prophet, parenthetically, the prophet Daniel, right, also says.
Speaking of Enoch.
Right. So in other words, it could be that it reads this way, but it could be that he's really meaning Daniel. Right. So that's where it's hard. It's a little
sometimes ambiguous. Like Daniel has the Son of Man prophecy, but Enoch also has the Son of Man prophecy. It could have been just somewhere where Daniel and and Enoch.
It's not impossible that he means Daniel. It's not impossible. I put it that way. That's why I'm saying it's a little hard to get a grasp on what he's saying sometimes, because it's a little ambiguous. But he introduces Daniel in verse 5 as if he's bringing him up for the first time. That's why, because he says, Daniel says likewise concerning the same, right?
Yeah, I was thinking like maybe he meant
as if this is one thing, and then Daniel says the same thing.
And the second time he says Daniel because he means Daniel.
Right. So it's sort of implying that he thinks that this is in Enoch.
Yeah.
But it says, Daniel says likewise, right? So what does likewise mean? Like what? Like Enoch, right?
I don't think that's Barnabas' only reference to Enoch anyway.
Well, anyways, but then it says, and Daniel says likewise concerning the same. And I beheld the 4th beast, which again is identified as the Roman Empire. And beheld the 4th beast, wicked and powerful and fiercer than all the beasts of the sea, and that 10 horns sprang from it, right? Which you would think that would mean that it was subsequent to. And see, that's where the scholars go. The scholars, there's no real honest consensus about this, but they tend to They tend to think about how the Roman Empire was broken up into quote unquote 10 European powers, like the Goths and the Visigoths and the Vandals and the the Vandals or whatever, all the different kind of.
Visigoths.
Yeah, I know, I'm just kind of poking fun. But anyway, they're just like all of these different fragmentary sort of, that's what people sort of break them up. I'm just saying that, that I don't think that's quite how Barnabas sees it. And so I'm trying to see things through Barnabas' vision here. It says that 10 horns sprang from it, and out of them a little excretion horn. So that would be this guy, right? And that it subdued under one 3 of the great horns. So essentially, the little horn. Okay, so this is where it gets kind of spicy. It doesn't really speak of 11 horns per se. It never really quite uses that number, although if you count the 10 plus the little one, you might think 10 and a half, you might think 11, something like that. But it occurs to me, and this is a little bit speculative, that when the word little is used, right, I think limited. Okay? And here's why. And I hate to invoke the Gospel of Thomas right now, but because by way of contrast. In the Gospel of Thomas, he talks about the little fish versus the fine, large fish, right? So little is contrasted with large, right? He talks about the sheep, the 99 sheep, who you assume to be regular sized sheep. And then he says that the one sheep that got lost was the largest. Right? So now you have large again, right? And then he talks about how the woman with the loaves, right, made a large loaf. So the idea is that large has to do with the complete understanding, completeness, right? That the sheep that was the largest was the one whom he loved, right? And so in other words, like for example, the way that we broke it down, James, Peter, and John. John was future tense, and he was the apostle whom Jesus loved, right? He was the one that he left to find this one, and that was the sheep that he loved,
the one he longed
right?
for. Was
the largest one, right? So and then we talked also about the little book, right? The little book that was open in the hand of the angel, right? So if the little book has the context of being limited, it means it's a limited book, right? And what does that mean? That means that it's the book that's limited by the canon, right? And so if you have this little horn that subdues 3 horns, right, then it could be that it is the reason how the way that it limited the way that it subdued those larger horns, or those 3,000 years, in other words, right? If that's the way you want to break it down, right? Was that time, because it was limited?
He has a beginning and an end, a limited time.
Well, how does you see that he talks about he has a mouth that speaks blasphemies and all this stuff? How do you limit God, right? Like we know in Jude, for example, right? We can quote Jude that he says that Enoch wrote the book, right? But the naysayers don't accept that. That he could say that he's the 7th from Adam. But the naysayers limit that. They say that he's not. You see what I'm saying? Jude says that he prophesied. Right? And the naysayers say that he didn't. Right? So what do you have here? You're having Jude basically limited. No, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. Right? So the power of the small is that it encapsulates and constrains that which is large, that which is fine, that which is loved. You see what I'm saying? It's sort of, that's how you can sort of tie all of these things together. You know, and the fact that, for example, the Lord's coming in the book of Jude is in the context of Enoch. not been taught, right? This has been excluded. So the powers that be for these 3,000 years, or these 2,000 years so far, have limited that teaching. And so when Peter comes along, and he's the second witness to this, and he says that when we came to you talking about his power and his coming, it was what? It was out of the book of Enoch, right? Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment, right? And he has to say that it was not a fable, right? But for 2,000 years, we've questioned this and said, no, it is a fable.
Well, until about a couple hundred years ago, we didn't even have Enoch in the West.
Well, and that's part of the power.
So
So how does he subdue this age, right? So what does he do? He limits it. So in other words, you would read the book, you would go by Jude. If you took Jude's word for it, and he said Enoch was the seventh from Adam, and that he prophesied, if you were to give him credit, if you got virtue to your faith, enough virtue to give Jude his credit that he is due, right? Then the knowledge would be added to your virtue. You see what I'm saying? Such that you would read this book that that Barnabas actually agrees with and thinks is inspired. You see what I'm saying? And so, in other words, the way in which the little horn exercises power is by being a limiting factor to your understanding.
Once in realms of heaven's grace, angels watch the human race. From their vantage high above, they yearn for a forbidden love, leaving their holy place behind, in pursuit of earthly kind. Taught mankind forbidden lore, darkness spread forevermore. Oh, the watchers fell, and so did we, blinded by curiosity, vanity, violence, and deceit. Still we stand, we won't retreat. Lust for the flesh and feeding of pain brought the angels down in shame, teaching arts of impure gain, bringing forth an endless stain. Chains of judgment are tightly bound, for their rebellion they were cast to the ground. And as that day draws increasingly near, as it is written, they shall shake with fear. Oh, the watchers fell, and so did we, blinded by curiosity, vanity, violence, and deceit. Still we stand, we won't retreat. Ancient stars now fallen low, teaching us what we must not know. Though we walk a wayward path, the truth has come to us at last. Eyes wide open, hearts now clear, against the darkness we must steer. In his light we all now stand, the day of God is now at hand. Oh, the watchers fell, and so did we, blinded by curiosity, real prophet foretold. It wasn't a fable, and it isn't a lie. The prophet spoke words that we cannot deny. Holy visions on sacred ground. Unlock these verses, the truth has been found. Jude and Peter read side by side, show Enoch's usage was nothing to hide. He said he was ancient and a prophet of old, and it was about these men the old prophet foretold. Peter's key is to unlock the door to heaven's gate, and it can't be ignored. Hidden mysteries now brought to the light. Unlock the secrets, put an end to the night. Ancient wisdom, a prophet of old. His words remain with us in all he foretold. Scriptures are sealed to reveal something more, and Peter's key